I paid for their wedding, their home, their IVF. At Thanksgiving they said we're cutting off negative people. So I quietly cut off $17.90. I was up before the sun, my joints stiff as always but my hands steady enough to measure flour, butter, and the puree I had made from pumpkins grown in the small patch of soil behind my house. The smell of nutmeg and cinnamon filled the kitchen. I pressed the dough with care, smoothing the edges of the crust. At 72, I no longer moved quickly, but I moved with purpose. Thanksgiving had always been the holiday where I felt most needed, most present, as if the act of bringing a pie meant I still had a place at the table. I wore my old blue cardigan, the one Preston used to tug on when he was a boy, and slipped the pie into its tin carrier. My phone buzzed just as I was setting it on the counter. It was Preston. "Mom?" he said, his voice tight. "Do not bring anything rustic. Miranda wants everything clean and modern this year." I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, the smell of pumpkin pie wrapping around me like a shawl. "Rustic?" I asked. "It is just pie, Preston. Pie for family." He sighed, heavy, impatient. "Mom, you know how Miranda feels. Just do not make a big deal. Come, but please, no extras." He hissed, "No extras." He hung up before I could answer. I set the phone down slowly, staring at the pie. For a moment, I thought of leaving it behind, but then I thought of Clara. She had whispered to me last year, when no one was listening, "Grandma, I love your pie." I decided I would carry it with me, whether or not anyone ate it. The drive to Preston's house was long enough for me to replay memories of past Thanksgivings. Laughter in cramped kitchens, children running through yards, the smell of roasted turkey that clung to sweaters for days. Back then, I never imagined food could divide a family. I thought food meant welcome. When I arrived, Preston's home was bright with lights strung across polished walls. Cars lined the driveway, sleek and new. I parked at the far end, pie balanced carefully in my hands as I walked to the door. Inside, laughter and music spilled out. A waiter, yes, they had hired staff this year, opened the door and looked at me with polite surprise. I smiled, though my heart was thudding. Miranda swept into the room wearing a silver dress that shimmered under the chandelier. She kissed cheeks, posed for photos, her voice crisp and commanding. When she saw me, her smile faltered just slightly. Her eyes dropped to the tin in my hands. "Agatha," she said, loud enough for the guests nearest her to hear, "what is that smell? It clings. It is so nostalgic." She paused, letting the silence stretch before adding, "Agatha's traditions smell like poverty." A few guests chuckled nervously. My cheeks burned. I clutched the pie tighter, suddenly wishing I had left it in the car. But then Clara darted forward, her little hands clutching mine. She looked up, eyes wide with mischief and loyalty. "Grandma," she whispered quickly, "I love your pie." Before I could bend down to kiss her forehead, Miranda's manicured hand pulled Clara back. "Darling, do not linger. Guests are waiting." Clara's eyes lingered on me as she was whisked away. I took a seat at the far end of the table. The room was filled with people I hardly knew, friends of Preston's, colleagues, neighbors. Miranda considered fashionable. They spoke of travel, investments, new restaurants. I listened quietly, folding my hands in my lap. Every so often, someone glanced at me as if to wonder why I was there. The turkey arrived, carved by Preston himself, proud and tall. Glasses clinked, plates passed. The dessert trays circled, guests passed the pie around. But somehow, my pie was forgotten. Preston stood suddenly, glass raised high. "From today forward," he declared, voice firm, "we cut negative people, family, friends, anyone who drags us down. We only move with positivity, with vision. And that means—" His eyes slid to me, sharp as knives. "Mom, you are toxic. You are out." The room hushed. Forks stilled, mid-air. A cousin I barely recognized smirked and added, "She thinks paying for IVF made her important." "Pathetic." Laughter rippled. Miranda's voice cut through, cool and clear. "Your sacrifices?" "They were never sacrifices, Agatha. They were bribes for attention, and we are done pretending otherwise." I sat frozen, pie still untouched behind me. For a moment my throat closed, breath shallow. The humiliation was sharp, public, deliberate. Yet beneath it, something stirred in me that was not shame, but clarity. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. I reached into my handbag with hands steadier than I felt. From it I drew a small device, a portable projector Preston had once mocked me for buying when I wanted to show Clara old family slides. I set it on the table and pressed the button. As I set the projector device on the dessert table, I hesitated. I had brought it tucked inside my old handbag, hidden beneath my shawl, so Miranda or her guests would not see it. It was not impulsive, it was planned. I had bought that mini projector months ago, the one Preston mocked me for, and had practiced bringing it along in secret, knowing that one day the truth had to speak louder than mockery. Light spilled across the polished wall, the chatter died instantly. The image sharpened. A hospital corridor, white walls, rows of incubators. Then the voice of a doctor, solemn and warm. Thanks to the donation of $17.9 million from Agatha Winslow, thousands of children will be born with hope. Gasps shifted, craning their necks. Someone fumbled with a phone, capturing the moment on video. Miranda's smile cracked. Preston's face drained of color. On the screen, text appeared. The Negative People Fund, in honor of Agatha Winslow. I sat back, folding my hands in my lap, as the silence in the room grew heavy, broken only by the quiet whir of the projector. A woman across the table whispered, $17.9 million? Another voice, incredulous, asked, "She did that?" The cousin who had called me pathetic swallowed hard, his smirk gone. Clara's small face lit up with something fierce and proud. She clapped once, the sound ringing clear in the stunned silence. The projector clicked off, leaving only the glow of the chandelier. The room seemed darker now, heavier. Miranda stood stiff, her hands trembling slightly around her glass. Preston sat down slowly, eyes darting between me and the guests, whose gazes had turned cold upon him. I said nothing. I did not need to. The truth had spoken louder than I ever could. I remember the early mornings in that small classroom, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, worn linoleum floors, and rows of hospital beds. I taught nursing, wound care, vital signs, bedside manner at a local community college. I believed care was love made visible. I believed that teaching someone how to hold a hand, how to give an injection without fear, was sacred work. I never called it small, but others did. Miranda would visit when Clara was in school. She stood in the doorway of my classroom, cheeks painted and shoes polished, and leaned in close. Voice low. "Teaching peasants," she said, smirking. "You think you are saving lives, Mom, but nobody respects that." She touched her designer scarf, as if she could brush away every memory of me with it. I kept teaching, I kept showing up. Because Clara needed me. Because life was not about respect given, it was about doing. When Clara turned 4, I gave her a Polaroid camera, small and simple. We spent Sundays in the yard, dried leaves crunching under my shoes, little feet running, laughter. I captured Clara's first steps, her face when she tasted sugar, her hair lifted by wind. One afternoon, Miranda saw me hanging the photos on a twine in the kitchen, the edges curled, the shots soft. "That ruins the aesthetic," she hissed, pointing to the wall. But those soft photos, those imperfect frames, were my pride. Later I realized she had Polish frames made for her mother, Dr. Celine Marwick, and hung opulent portraits of her in every hallway. Light played off their glass, reflecting prestige. No Polaroid in those halls. On Clara's 5th birthday, I sewed a dress from leftover fabric, tiny flowers and soft cotton. I made homemade lemonade and baked a simple cake because Clara had asked for yellow flowers and candles. A backyard party. I wrapped her gift, a cloth doll I had stitched, pink cheeks, hand-embroidered dress. Miranda came out in heels, surveyed the yard, frowned. She said in front of the neighbors, "We don't do backyard birthdays. We are a modern family." Her tone hurt most, not for me, but for Clara. She took the cloth doll, tossed it behind the shrubbery. Later, she bought Clara a designer doll with fur coat and eyelashes. Clara thanked her politely, but the doll never wore the simple dress I made. When Clara was born, it was not easy. I helped with the IVF payments long before anyone else knew what that stood for. I drove to appointments, held her hand, and prayed. I never asked for recognition. I never demanded a photo credit. Just a nod, perhaps a quiet thank you. But when the ultrasound showed 2 heartbeats, Miranda bristled. "Your money bought this?" she whispered into Preston's shoulder in the waiting room. "Do not think she earned this privilege." I heard. I kept my eyes on the screen as they labeled the image, Baby A, Baby B, and I saw 2 tiny hearts flickering. I believed those hearts were mine as much as Clara's. Years passed. I retired, but never from being grandma. I painted, I sewed, I baked. I mailed handmade quilts for birthdays. I told stories of my childhood, of a house with no electricity, of walking to school in the rain, of my father singing softly despite hunger. Miranda dismissed those stories as quaint. "You romanticize hardship," she said once at a dinner party. "Nobody wants to hear about where you came from." She placed her hand over Clara's mouth when she responded, "Grandma's stories are part of who I am." Clara looked at me from behind her mother's elbow. In that moment, pride and heartbreak warmed me both. It was during those years that I saw the pattern. Whenever I offered something simple, Polaroids, cloth dolls, homemade dresses, backyard sunshine, Miranda saw disorder. When she offered gold, fabric labels, staged photos, velvet cakes, she saw tradition. When I spoke with Clara about old recipes for pumpkin pie and fresh bread, Miranda called them rustic, tacky. When she cooked French food with butter and cream for guests, she embodied modern. When I whispered blessings in our old language, she frowned and called it an accent. When I smiled, she said I was trying to steal attention. But I was only being me. One day, Clara asked, "Grandma, why does Mom pout when you bring quilts and not when Aunt Celine does?" I paused. I loved Clara's questions. I knelt, touched her hair. "Because," I said, "sometimes people applaud those who shine bright and forget those who give light softly." Clara's eyes filled with unasked words. She stood quietly, but something changed in her that day. I saw in her face that kindness mattered. Those names and labels could wound deeper than any knife. Through the years, I carried those wounds in silence, stitched them into my aprons and quilts. I held them behind polite smiles at dinner tables, nodded when compliments went to plate arrangements instead of food taste, ignored when Miranda spoke of style, media, image. I believed love would be enough. I believed my presence was enough. I believed in the arcs of time, until Thanksgiving. And in that quiet belief, I found strength I did not know I held. I called Margot Ellery on a Thursday morning, the sky pink over the rooftops. Her number felt familiar, steady. I had walked into her office many times before when Clara was tiny, when Preston needed legal advice for small business matters. But this time, I was not asking for business. I was asking for justice. I sat in her leather chair across from her in her downtown office, blinds angled so light slanted across heavy bookshelves. I told her everything. How Miranda had insulted my traditions, how Preston had said I was toxic, how Clara's drawings with my homemade gifts were treated like garbage. I told her I wanted to change my will. I needed it to protect what was real. Margot listened, nodding slowly, fingers steepled. "You have to do this quietly, Agatha," she said. "Don't answer them with anger. Let them reveal themselves. The truth, they will expose themselves in their own defense. You only need evidence, voice, proof." And she slid me a folder of forms, trust instruments, grant agreements, ways to create conditional inheritance. Her words were a lifeline. After that meeting, I went home, heart full of resolution. I started gathering the evidence I had buried. A photograph of Clara on her 6th birthday, hand-stitched dress I made, standing under a tree, a cloth doll in her hand. I had kept the photo even after Miranda had said that doll was cheap. I had kept it because Clara's joy was worth more than labels. I found the little cloth doll, its fabric faded, one seam loose. I wrapped it in tissue paper and placed it in a box labeled Proof. That night, I replayed recordings in my mind. There was Preston, in our dining room, when he thought I was in the kitchen, saying, loud enough for Clara to hear, "Mom's gifts embarrass us." His voice was sharp, dismissive. I had feared hearing that, but knowing it made something settle in me. A clarity, that their shame was not mine. Rosie Lewis, my friend from the first hospital where I taught nursing, heard about what had happened. She came by with a small flash drive containing videos she had collected over the years. Me teaching nursing students, volunteering at a reproductive health clinic, sitting on panels. There was also a document from the clinic confirming that I had pledged funds to research fertility and maternal health. I felt tears when Rosie handed me those papers. They were old, often silent in my memory, but now they sang loudly. Clara, too, unwittingly helped. One afternoon I found her in my study drawing a picture. She had drawn me in my apron, holding Clara's hand, hearts overhead, smiles. I stood behind her quietly, watching how she pressed color into paper. Preston came into the room, looked at the picture, shook his head. "Art should have value," he said, dismissive. "That's just scribbles." I did not reply, but I saw Clara's small shoulders shrink, and I saw the proof. Clara believed, still, in what I made. Her trust in me was evidence of what Preston denied. I collected doctor's bills, receipts from the fertility clinic, proof of my own savings accounts used to pay IVF treatments, ledgers showing my contributions. Margot taught me how to mark them, where to store, how to get certified copies. Each paper, every receipt, was a stitch sewing me back together. I took photos of Clara's handmade dress, of quilts I had sewn, of Polaroids with edges yellowed by sunlight. I saved voice memos, one where Clara giggles at me mixing batter, another where I whisper bedtime prayers in the old language Clara never heard from Miranda. In those recordings, my accent trembles. In those prayers, my heart opens. Sometimes I felt fear creeping in. If they discovered what I was doing, if Miranda tried to erase evidence, throw away photos, delete recordings. At night I lay awake, thinking of Preston's voice, Miranda's laughter. But I also thought of Clara's hands, of Rosie's loyalty. I thought of Margot's calm, rational voice in her office. "You are not imagining this," she said. "You deserve to be seen." By then, I had drafted a new version of my will. It specified that in order to receive any inheritance, one must issue a public apology in writing or video, acknowledge and respect the contributions, not mine alone, but those small gifts, those homemade dresses, the tradition I carried. If the requirements were not met, the bulk of the estate must go toward a fund I established, the Negative People Fund, in honor of Agatha Winslow, dedicated to support women and children whose love was judged too simple, too poor, too traditional. Margot helped me store the draft will safely, notarized, copies in places where no one would suspect, in my safety deposit box, with Rosie, and in an encrypted digital file. I whispered to her one night, "Let them try to discredit me. I have all of this." Her hand on mine, firm and kind. Rosie made sure backups existed. She scanned every document, every photo, every voice recording. We printed extra copies, mailed them to trusted friends to hold. I felt a little foolish sometimes, hoarding papers, but every paper was a promise, to Clara, to myself, to the truth. I watched Clara sleep one night, clutching that cloth doll I made years ago. I touched her hair. I felt sorrow, but also fierce love. Those memories I had once dismissed in the dark, they were now light, a quiet light, but strong. The next morning I placed all evidence in a leather portfolio. I sorted the Polaroids, the photographs, and the recordings. I sat at my kitchen table with Margot's forms ready. I felt something I had not felt in years. Not fear, not apology, but power. Not the kind that demands applause, but the kind that can stand steady in silence. I arrived at Preston and Miranda's house as the sun dipped low, golden rays glancing off pristine windows and polished marble of their front steps. Guests in silk dresses and tailored suits stepped from sleek cars, clutching designer handbags, greeting each other with perfumed air and rehearsed laughter. I carried the pumpkin pie I'd made at home, crust crimped with care, filling warm and fragrant. Clara grabbed my hand, her eyes bright. She had helped me mix the filling earlier, and the kitchen had smelled like cinnamon and safety. Inside, the dining room was arranged with glittering candle holders, crystal goblets, a table long and wide, set with silverware that gleamed. Miranda stood by the entrance, greeting guests. Lips painted to perfection, her voice clear, polished. She wore pearls, a gown of satin that shimmered. She smiled at me when I entered, but it was the kind of smile calibrated for cameras. She paused, looked at the pie, the crust, the way I held Clara's hand. When I set the pie down on the dessert table, Miranda's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Agatha," she said loudly enough that those nearest could hear, "what is that smell? It clings. It is so nostalgic." She paused, letting her voice carry across faces. Agatha's traditions smell like poverty. A few guest laughs, muffled, polite. I folded my hands, felt heat in my cheeks, but lifted my chin, because Clara stood beside me, trusting me. Preston stood then, glass in hand. The clinking stopped. "From today forward," he said, voice firm, echoing in the hush. "We cut negative people. Family, friends, anyone who drags us down. Mom, you are toxic. You are out." A cousin, one of many people at the table who had smiled at Miranda's jokes, chuckled. "She thinks paying for IVF made her important. Pathetic." Miranda raised her eyebrows, a smile of cold triumph curling on her lips. "Your sacrifices?" "They were never sacrifices, Agatha. They were bribes for attention." Clara's small hand tightened in mine. I looked down at her, eyes soft but full of sorrow. My throat itched. The dinner slowed, servings paused, cutlery still. The eyes of guests flickered between me and them. I had brought the projector with me, not out of impulse, but preparation. Tucked deep in my handbag beneath a folded shawl, it had traveled quietly beside me like a secret waiting for its moment. Months ago, when Preston mocked me for buying it to show Clara our old family slides, I had simply smiled. Now it has become my quiet rebellion. I had practiced setting it up, tested its battery, rehearsed what I might say, not that I planned to say much, because the truth, when shown clearly, did not need many words. I stayed quiet. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I focused on Clara's face, confusion, hurt, a little hope, because I needed her to know there was truth, even in this moment of disgrace. Then I reached into my purse, with hands that trembled slightly, found the small, portable projector I had packed. Guests shifted, murmured. I placed it on the table, clicked it on. A hush fell. Images flickered on the wall, sterile white halls, incubators, children's bassinets. A doctor's voice, measured and clear. "Thanks to Agatha Winslow's donation of $17.9 million, thousands of children will be born with hope." Gasps. Some hands flew to their mouths, some faces paled. Miranda's smile froze. Preston's cheeks drained. I watched the shadows move as the light from the projector cut through the luxury drapery. Then, almost unheard of over the room's sudden stillness, I heard the telltale beep of a phone. Someone live streaming. I saw a flash of light, a screen held up, recording. The clip would reach beyond this room, beyond this house. Miranda stood stiff. Preston swallowed. Clara's eyes glistened. Silence stretched. Then a woman guest, voice trembling, said, "17.9 million?" Another whispered, "She did that?" The projector blinked off. The luxury room seemed darker, expensive silence pressing. Mirrors reflecting faces of guilt, embarrassment. I said nothing. I had nothing to prove now. The truth had spoken. Clara leaned into me. She saw me. In that moment, I saw dignity settle in her eyes, stronger than fear. The room would be changed forever. I watched it all unfold on my phone, in the quiet of my living room, heart pounding like a drum. The video from Thanksgiving had gone viral. Social media feeds exploded with the "negative people save lives" hashtag that I never imagined would trend, yet there it was, glowing in hardly believable blue and white. Someone had posted that quote, cheap or priceless, under a photo of Clara hugging the cloth doll I made, the very one Miranda had thrown behind the shrubs. Comments poured in. "True love does not come with designer labels. Heartbreakingly beautiful. She paid, they shamed. She saved." Reporters called. A local news anchor asked, "What is the Negative People Fund in honor of Agatha Winslow?" A hospital representative confirmed, yes, the name was official. The fund had been established months ago, quietly, while Miranda and Preston were busy polishing their image. Now the world knew. $17.9 million earmarked for fertility research, maternal care, for people like me, who raised love, not applause. Then netizens dug back into old photos. One user posted a split image. Left, Clara in her cloth dress, wide smile, cloth doll in lap. Right, the same Clara years later, blonde Barbie-style doll in designer clothes, tight smile. Caption, cheap or priceless? It was shared thousands of times. I held my breath seeing joy on Clara's face in the old photo, sorrow in the new. So many people wrote, "This brought me to tears." My grandmother made quilts, not brands. The media turned to Celine Mierwick, Miranda's mother. She had always been the standard-bearer of prestige in our circles. They asked her on TV, radio, "Do you agree with your daughter's comments about Agatha?" Celine's lips parted, closed again. "I have nothing to say," she finally said. Her silence spread farther than any statement. It felt like betrayal. The public sensed something rotten in the story when even pride itself refused to speak. Miranda and Preston tried to respond. Miranda posted something polite, "Family is complicated." Preston tweeted about legacy and moving forward with positivity. But the damage was done. Memes spread. Couple mocked grandma who built their life. People remixed clips of Miranda turning up her nose at the pie, juxtaposed with Agatha teaching nursing students, holding Clara, donating for IVF. Friends of Miranda's who once posted her glamorous photos quietly deleted them. Supporters dropped off, clients canceled bookings. Someone created an art meme, a curtained stage where Miranda stands under spotlight, puppet strings in her hands. Beneath, Agatha stands in soft light, holding Clara and the cloth doll. Label, "Who is the real artist?" At night I lay awake by my window. The world outside was calm, unaware of storms, but on my phone comments rose like tides. A woman from Texas wrote, "My grandma was always negative. Now she's the reason I exist." A nurse I once trained posted, "She taught me dignity in simplicity." Clara, asleep in her bed, wrapped in the same quilt I sewed, didn't know yet that her life had become like a mirror reflecting truth. When I closed my eyes, I saw Miranda's face shrinking in the face of exposure. Preston tapping his foot, phone pressing to his ear. Not calls of apology, but reporters asking, "What is negativity now?" Clara, in dreams maybe, repeated the phrase I whispered to her once, "Your worth is never counted by what you are not, but by what you are." And at that moment, I felt I had already won. Not trophies, not lawsuits yet, but hearts. The world was listening. The seed of truth I planted with photographs, quilts, recordings, the doll, all reached deeper than their shame could hide. When people say Grandma was just being negative, they now say Grandma saved lives. I stood in the courtroom, heart in my throat, as the judge called the case. Agatha Winslow versus Preston and Miranda Hale. The benches were wooden, the air thick with whispered tension, people leaning forward, lawyers in dark suits rustled papers. I felt Clara's small hand in mine beneath the table, her fingers trembling. Margot Ellery stood for me, clear-voiced. Across from her, Miranda's lawyer rose, brows knit. He spoke first. "Your Honor, it is the defense's position that Agatha Winslow's mental capacity is in question. At 72, she has shown signs of confusion, emotional distress. We contend that this new will was made under duress, manipulated by those seeking publicity. The grant to the Negative People Fund is not valid because she was not clear-headed." I closed my eyes briefly. I remembered the afternoons assembling evidence, voice memos, photos, every scrap. I remembered Preston sneering, Miranda's glare. Then Rosie stepped up. She carried a folder of photos, Clara in hand-stitched dress with doll, images of Agatha teaching nursing, volunteering in fertility clinic, printouts of voice recordings, Preston saying, "Mom's gifts embarrass us." She handed the law clerk the tape, clear and crisp. The courtroom sat up. Next came neighbors. One had seen Miranda throw away the cloth doll. Another had seen Clara hide Polaroids under her bed because her mother said they were cheap stuff. The exhibits, doctor's bill from the fertility clinic, bank statements showing Agatha's $17.9 million donation, written pledge confirmations, all verified, all real. Then Clara was called to the stand. Her voice was small, breath-shaking. "Your Honor," she said, "I never felt poor with Grandma. I only felt loved." Tears glinted in her eyes. She showed the judges one of the pictures, the cloth doll, the dress, her smile, every stitch, every imperfect seam, every joy caught in sunlight. Miranda's lawyer leaned forward. This child is being manipulated by her grandmother and those seeking profit. Margot stood firm. The judge observed each side. Clara looked at me, eyes full. I swallowed. After deliberation, the judge cleared her throat. She spoke in measured tones. After reviewing all documents, photos, voice recordings, doctor's bills, witnesses, and hearing testimony, this court finds that the new will presented by Agatha Winslow is valid and enforceable. Ms. Winslow was of sound mind at the time, and no evidence of undue influence or duress is found. Therefore, Preston Hale and Miranda Hale are hereby removed from entitlement to her estate under the previous will. All inheritance and control shall vest with the trust established as the Negative People Fund, in honor of Agatha Winslow. A stunned hush. Guests in the gallery gasped. Miranda's face was drained of color, Preston's jaw slack. Clara squeezed my hand. I felt warmth in her grip, even though tears ran down her cheeks. I stood, bowed my head to hide a smile. Miranda tried to rise, eyes wild, to speak, but no words came. Preston turned away. The judge added, "Furthermore, Ms. Hale and Mr. Hale must issue a public apology acknowledging the contributions of Agatha Winslow. Any violation of the conditions spelled out in the will result in further legal remedies." I listened, tears in my throat, not for revenge but for justice. Clara stood beside me afterwards, reporters calling, cameras flashing. She said softly, "Grandma, they cannot erase you now." I held her tightly. The court's gavel struck. I felt a weight lift. Not pride, but peace. They had tried to write me out of their story, but I had written a story too powerful to ignore. I watched the fallout like a slow sunrise, terrible and beautiful. The story of Thanksgiving humiliation, then Agatha's revelation at court, had become wildfire. Every news station ran her clip. Social media pages shared Clara's embrace with her grandmother more than the insult. Memes, editorials, commentary, everyone wanted to be part of the reckoning. The video of Clara hugging me in that cloth dress, the one Miranda had cast aside, was everywhere. Faces lit up in living rooms when people saw it. Real love, some said. Heart over brand, others. That image became a symbol. What respect looks like, what humility looks like, what honor looks like. More people shared it than the clip of Miranda mocking the traditions. The mockery seemed distant. The love seemed near. Preston's phone began to ring off the hook, not with business deals but with cancellations. Investors who once praised his polished image pulled contracts. Companies severed partnerships. Board members left. Miranda's PR consultants deleted images, scrubbed posts. All those glamorous events, all those magazine spreads, it could not stay afloat when the foundation was shown, as built on shame. Miranda's world was small and loud. PTA mothers whispered, neighbors who once greeted her at church crossed the street, parents of Clara's classmates looked away, children's birthday party invites stopped coming. Miranda tried to smile in public, tried to lead toast in social gatherings, but people's eyes flickered with judgment. She was a show that had lost its audience. A television analyst, one of the few who had once praised Preston's leadership qualities, now tilted his head and said, "If you cannot respect your mother, how can you respect your partners? How can people trust someone whose first rejection is their own blood?" The line was quoted again and again online. Celine Marwick watched all this unfold with thin lips. She had always stood tall in public, immaculate in reputation, but now her silence became a spotlight. Nobody could defend what had been said. Her daughter's critics said there was no depth to her exalted class, just a veneer. The social network that rose up around playdates, fundraiser committees, charity galas, they all backed away. I received a letter in a crisp envelope from one of Preston's biggest investors. "Regrettably, we must withdraw our funding. Our values cannot align with actions of humiliation and erasure." Another one. "The board finds it best you resign." Within weeks, the company sank into debt, lawsuits for breach of contract, loss of revenue. At home, Miranda stood in her wardrobe, staring at racks of clothes, dresses still tagged, shoes untouched. Outside, the gardeners trimmed bushes, the cars sat unused. I felt no pleasure in seeing it. Pleasure felt cheap. But I felt something else, vindication. A sense that long-standing wrongs were finally named, seen, held to account. Clara came over after school and hugged me tight. She said, "Grandma, People are finally seeing you." I held her. Her head rested on my chest. I felt the rise and fall of her breath, small but steady. She did not need to say more. The world had said it for her. That night I looked out at the house lights across the street, once mirrors of success for Miranda. I saw windows dark, rooms empty. I saw a silhouette there, but the hubbub had moved on. The stage had collapsed. The applause had withered. I did not laugh. I did not gloat. I just exhaled, deep and clean. The house of false shimmer, built on mockery and silent judgments, was falling. The power it held was evaporating, and somewhere in that decay, new life was stirring. Communities formed around those who had been dismissed. Women who had been called negative, mothers who had been mocked for accent or tradition, they were finding space to foster respect. Clara was drawing again, smiling, making art in my kitchen. Rosie visited often with quilt scraps. We sewed together, laughed, and shared recipes. In the ruin of their false world, the truth reigned. In the collapse of their vanity, love stood unshaken. In the absence of their praise, respect found its voice. And I, Agatha Winslow, held my head high, not because they lost, but because I never stopped being worthy. I stood behind the ribbon, hands trembling just a little, as the crowd gathered before the Winslow Center for Family and Care. The building glowed in the morning sun, its windows broad, its doors wide, and a banner overhead that read, "A place where love is not measured by labels." Clara stood next to me, her small hand warm in mine. We shared a smile. Today was more than an opening, it was restoration. Miranda did not come. Preston whispered something into his phone, but he stayed away. I heard later he said he didn't want to face the shame. That was fine with me. I had built nothing for their approval. I built for those who needed it. Margot Ellery, robed in modest navy, stepped forward. She cleared her throat. "Today we open this center with the hope that every mother, every child, every family judged for being too simple, too traditional, too negative, will find safety here." Applause rippled through the crowd. Mothers in wheelchairs, fathers with small businesses, children clutching handmade dolls, volunteers with soft eyes. Rosie stood in the back, her quilt slung over her shoulder, nodding. Clara held giant scissors, ribbon bright red between her hands. I knelt, whispered in her ear, "You deserve something real that lasts." She looked at me, smile wide and steady, and snipped. The ribbon fell away. Clara's laughter mingled with the choir song behind us, and then, as if in response, volunteers carried forward the old Polaroid album I had long thought lost. The one Miranda found cheap and threw away. Someone placed it on a pedestal near the entrance. The photographs within were weathered. Clara in her cloth dress, the cloth doll in her lap, our hands messy from pie, our smiles imperfect in golden afternoons. People gathered, leaning in. Clara's finger paused over one photo. She pointed, and I bent down. "That was the day I thought sunshine was safer than anything else," I said. She pressed the image. "Grandma," she whispered, "that was love." There was truth in her voice. Reporters snapped photos. Flashbulbs popped. A headline born at that moment. She was cut off for being negative. She cut them off for good and gave life. I saw my face on screens, not graceful, not youthful, but honest. Lines of years, hands of work, eyes that had held grief and gratitude in equal measure. I stood still before the cameras. They asked if I was proud. I said they erased me with silence. I answered with life. A mother in the crowd cried quietly. A little girl held my skirt. Clara stood tall beside me, her braid swinging. Volunteers led children through classrooms, one room for workshops in traditional crafts, another for fertility support counseling, and another quiet room of old recipes, stories, sewing, photos, heritage, as much as care. As the afternoon sun shifted, I looked out over the courtyard. The laughter of children, some born through IVF, some simply born to parents who believed. They played under the shade of trees I had helped plant here. The scent of fresh quilts, of cinnamon pies made by others, of voices in many accents, singing songs mothers had taught them. It was chaotic in its beauty. Backstage guests included people I had never known, young mothers who said, "Thank you." Nurses I had taught long ago, their faces lined with years, their voices soft with respect. One woman handed me a small card. Your tradition saved my daughter's hope. I name her after your pie. I held it against my heart. Clara tugged my sleeve. Grandma, was I wrong to love your quilt? I looked down. Never, my dear. Quilts heal bones, she giggled. She reached up and kissed my cheek. In that moment, I felt more than gratitude, I felt inheritance. Legacy. Miranda's name was spoken only once during the dedication. Margot said, "This center is for all who were silent, for people who were told they did not belong, for people like Agatha Winslow." No invitation to her, no apology necessary. My actions spoke. As dusk fell, fairy lights twinkled around the entrance. Clara and I walked the halls together. She ran her fingers over quilts sewn by elderly women of our community. She pressed against the wall where a photograph of Agatha teaching nursing students hung. Her eyes were full. I sat by the window in the reception hall, Clara beside me, a cup of hot tea between us. The song of children drifted through open doors. I looked out toward the Polaroid album, under the spotlight near the entrance. I thought of the years I swallowed insults, the many Thanksgivings I carried, hoping someone would taste more than flavor, that someone would taste kindness, respect. Today they did. Clara leaned her head on my shoulder. "Grandma, people will remember you," she said. Her voice is soft but certain. "I will tell them." I smiled, though tears threatened. "And I will live by their telling," I replied. The center's doors remained open into the evening, the courtyard buzzing with voices, candles flickering in windows, shadows dancing. They once tried to drown me out with cringe, with sneers, with silence. But here, now, there was music, love, dignity. There was a legacy. I am Agatha Winslow, and I will not be erased. Thank you for listening to Agatha's story, where silence met strength and tradition triumphed over scorn. If her journey moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of someone you love, do not let her voice fade. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories for more real, powerful tales of women who refuse to be erased. Your support helps us honor their legacy and keep their wisdom alive, for you, for me, for generations to come. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and always remember, the quietest voices often carry the loudest truths.